Writing is hard, and one of the hardest things about writing is getting your symbols right. For the longest time, I thought that as a writer of fantasy and science fiction and that sort of thing, that I could get creative with my symbols and I could just apply almost arbitrary symbols to things. And this is actually an attitude that I've seen a lot of writers have, that they would just simply choose, oh, I like this image, I like this element, I like this mythological creature, whatever it is, and apply it in a way that doesn't always necessarily make sense. And I remember thinking that symbolism was not only arbitrary, but just a way of attaching a concrete thing to an abstract concept. And while that's true, it's definitely not arbitrary. And the concrete actually has a lot more to do with it than we think. It has less to do with the abstract thing, and it has more to do with the concrete thing in and of itself, which means that the symbol is extremely important. Now, I think that the type of belief where symbolism is arbitrary is actually pretty damaging, not only for philosophy and ontology and all these other very highfalutin things, but also for writers and for storytelling craft in general. And I think it's the reason why we've been swamped by some of the worst storytelling we've ever seen lately. Part of that stems from people's lack of understanding of what symbolism actually is and what makes good symbolism. Or, in fact, correct symbolism. It's not even a matter of whether or not it's good, it's just a matter of whether or not it's the correct symbolism. I'm not going to try to tell you that symbolism is a science or code or something that can be perfected. In fact, symbolism is the type of thing that you have to allow the right brain to figure out. I think some of the problems that we have in storytelling lately has come from a left-brained approach to symbolism and to storytelling in general. So, who better to go to when talking about symbolism than Jonathan Pageau? So in order to try to figure this stuff out, I decided to turn to Jonathan Pageau and see what he has to say on the topic. And it was actually kind of difficult to pin down exactly what he's saying about symbolism in the first place, which is super weird because he's literally always talking about symbolism. But because he's coming at symbolism from such a right-brained approach, it's not always pinned down and articulated in a super clear way where you can just lay it out in like a PowerPoint presentation or anything like that. It's actually the type of thing that he kind of weaves in and out of the topic and keeps applying this principle that is kind of above human language in a sense. It's a very concrete and grounded thing, in fact. And so it's very difficult to talk about it using such abstract things as words. Nonetheless, I did find a clip that talks about this from Jonathan Pageau's perspective. And it also has his brother Matthieu's perspective in there as well. They are in conversation with each other. So we're going to take a look at this clip between Jonathan Pageau and his brother Matthieu to try to dig up exactly what they are thinking about symbolism and what makes good symbolism.
The human experience is a universal experience. Some things are universal in the human experience. We all eat, we all sleep, we all work, we all rest, etc., etc. So the human experience is not random or arbitrary. It's universal.
And in a way, it's funny because to get to true symbolism, you almost have to destroy what people usually think what it is to give meaning to something. It's like you have to go beyond the emotional or personal, version of what happens, and then go back to the really basic ground level, kind of almost, primordial experience of something. It's like so the grass, the experience of the grass isn't like that. That nice Saturday that you spent with your family, and now the grass for you reminds you of that nice moment that you spent. The reality of grass has more to do with the fact that it's below your feet, that it's down there. That it's all these. It's like a chaotic mix of different things that are just there on the surface of the earth, rather than that. But maybe that participates in the reason why laying in the grass on that nice Saturday was a pleasant experience. Probably it does actually, but you have to go beyond that psychological, literary type of interpretation to get to the baser reality.
Yeah, but just because it's interpreted through human consciousness doesn't mean that it's like a personal, individual interpretation. It can be, but that's not how symbolism works, because I don't care about some person's individual interpretation of something when that interpretation is based on nothing but their little ideas. Symbolism becomes important when the interpretation is universal. I mean, that's one of the criteria by which we can distinguish real symbolism from the kind of symbolism you can find in a movie or in a story that's just been made up by someone on the street. And even then, most of the time when people tell a story or write a movie, they will use universal symbols, because otherwise nobody would care.
Exactly.
So even when it is interpreted through individuals, if they want people to care about their interpretation of reality, they'll make it universal. Otherwise, nobody cares.
Right. And so in a way, the idea would be to say that symbolism is really the way that our consciousness is written, in a way. It's like it's what makes it possible for us to even perceive and engage the world, is these basic structures that we're made out of, that our experience is made out of. I mean, that's symbolism. It's really it's really at the base. It's really what makes it possible for us to engage with the world. That's the same structure as the religious hierarchy, like the religious symbolism.
Jonathan Pageau makes this really important point that symbolism is the way that our consciousness is written. In other words, symbolism is how we understand reality and meaning. There's a structure to how we view reality, and true symbolism is that structure. So because of this, Jonathan actually dismisses the symbolism that is all based upon individual personal experience. The symbolism that's rooted in individual emotion is not true symbolism. Yes, we will have emotional resonance with good symbolism, but your audience isn't going to have that emotional resonance if the symbolism is all based in one's own personal experience. And this is why Matthieu makes the important point that you need to use universal symbolism. And in fact, really good writers are going to end up using universal symbolism anyway, regardless of whether or not they intended to. I think that that's actually a right-brained thing that comes into the story craft. By using symbolism that everyone understands, we can write stories that actually impact people as a whole rather than just some specific niche personality out there. You just have to look at the latest Pixar failure to see how this can go wrong. The latest Pixar movie is just all about a really specific person's very specific experience, and it doesn't have any symbolic weight to it. Nothing about the movie speaks to people at a fundamental level. It doesn't resonate because it doesn't have that symbolic underpinning. It has no real foundation in the real concrete world. The story is about a specific person rather than about the human experience as a whole. And after all, don't we want to tell stories that are about the human condition? That's so much better than trying to tell stories about a random Sally or Bob's experience. Their experience might be relevant to other people, but only if the symbolism matches with people's universal experience. Now, the universal experience is so deep and so rich and has so much to talk about that there's an endless number of potential stories to write. And the symbolism of the world is so rich and so deep that there's no end to how you could use it in storytelling. So this isn't a limit, rather it's to direct us to the right source. It's to direct us to the right source of storytelling in order for us to tell things that are impactful to people, rather than telling these stories that are as thin as paper and don't have the impact that we want stories to have on readers and audiences. In another place, Jonathan Pageau has this really important quote where he says, "The world manifests itself through human intelligence, through structures that are objective. These structures inform our stories, how we interact with others, and they manifest themselves at every level of reality, in how a city is formed, in how a person is formed, or even in how your everyday experience at every moment is formed." So we have a structure in order to view reality. We have to have a structure. Otherwise, we're just experiencing a bunch of data, and that data doesn't have any real meaning to it. The structure gives the data context, and the context gives the data meaning. The structure can be found in symbolism. For example, there's inherent symbolism in a tree because a tree necessarily has structure to it. It is a thing that provides shade by standing over you. It is a thing that provides fruit. It is a thing that even branches off in these smaller versions of itself. There is a lot of deep symbolism within the image of the tree. And because of this reality in the tree, there is so much that the tree can stand for. It could stand for comfort, provision, hierarchy, etc. And trees appear over and over in the Bible for this reason. There is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree Jonah sits under in the shade, the trees with good fruit or bad fruit in Jesus' teaching, and the tree of life in Revelation, and on and on and on. There are so many different trees throughout the Bible and also throughout literature. There's an almost endless well of meaning that we can get from the tree as a symbol, depending upon the context. Even now, I just used a symbol of the well to get at a meaning because a well is deep and a thing from which you draw things of value. Now, I say that there is almost an endless well of meaning because there are still limits. You can't make a tree into a symbol for something arbitrary. You could try to force it, but for other people, it wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be a true symbol. The truth of the symbol is really important. The symbols we use should be things that match up with universal human experience, not arbitrary things based upon your own personal experiences. Otherwise, the symbols won't resonate with other people. So how does this help us as writers? The first thing it tells us is that symbols are powerful ways of communicating meaning. In fact, we do this all the time, inevitably. And symbolism might even be the only way we communicate real meaning. So we have to have a structure in order to communicate meaning, and symbolism gives us that structure. So knowing this really helps us as writers understand that symbolism is one of our greatest tools for communicating truth in our stories. We want to have stories that have real impact and that actually mean something to readers. We're not trying to write stories that are frivolous and don't have real meaning. Well, maybe some of us are writing those types of stories, but I'm sure not. And if we're trying to write stories that have real meaning to people, then we should use symbols that are appropriate and that actually communicate that meaning. We need to use symbols that have that universal human language to them, a language that the right brain has a much better sense of than the left brain does. And so we need to be very cognizant of what the right brain is telling us when we're writing a story. Now, this gets us to our second thing. We should never force arbitrary symbols in our storytelling. There are some times in writing when a symbol might seem a little random and not fleshed out when we first use it. And in that case, you're not necessarily forcing it. It's probably just your right brain telling you, hey, this is something that could work. And you kind of have to write out a draft, figure out exactly how that symbol is going to work. You're not always going to know the first time it comes up. And in fact, I think that this is a really important point to make about using symbolism, is that you're not going to just reach out with your left brain and grab onto the symbol and drag it down and apply it in your story. You're not going to force any type of symbolism, really. You're not going to force arbitrary symbols, and you're not going to force true symbolism. It is a right-brained thing that you have to learn to do. It's something where you have to trust your right brain to guide you into the appropriate symbols for the story. Third thing, you got to stick to reality when you write. Now, I'm not saying that don't ever have things that can't happen in your stories. All my stories are either fantasy or science fiction, and so there's always things that can't happen. But what I'm talking about is the actual experience. Now, obviously, imagery is really important, and you want to have good imagery in your story. But this is something even beyond that. You want to connect the theme of your story or the experience of your character in some way to the real concrete world, not to something arbitrary, not to something abstract. It needs to be grounded in reality. So you're going to connect the theme or the experience of the character to the symbol based upon the character's experience of that concrete thing. So you got to let it be genuine, because you can trust that the structure of reality is there somewhere. This is going to be another right braid thing. You're not going to figure this out just by like uncovering all the clues and all the code of symbolism. These things are below the ground. These things are foundational. They're the inner workings of human consciousness. You're not going to just like have this map to try to figure it out. So instead, the best course of action is to simply stick to reality, stick to what grass actually is like, stick to what trees actually are like, because within how those things actually are and in how we experience those things, the symbolism is going to come out. The meaning is there. All you have to do is really trust that when you're writing, you are discovering that thing. You are discovering the connections. There is, as I've said before, a bottomless well within symbolism. There is a path forward in these things. And so when you're writing, you have to simply allow that structure that's underpinning all the meaning to manifest itself through the writing process. And you have to get out of the way.